Good morning. This meeting of the Illinois Advisory Committee to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission shall come to order on February 22nd, 2022 at 11:01 a.m. Central Time. My name is Cindy Buys, and I am currently serving as the Vice Chair of the Illinois Advisory Committee. Before we begin today's meeting, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge Black History Month, an annual celebration of achievements by African Americans in this country and their central role in our history. The first woman to be appointed to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights was a Black attorney and noted civil rights advocate, Frankie Muse Freeman. She was appointed in 1964, shortly after the commission was formed in 1957, and has been pursuing its mission toward the development of national civil rights policy and enhancement of federal civil rights laws. Her status as a Black woman meant that law firms would not hire her when she graduated from law school, so she set up her own practice. Shortly after that, she joined the NAACP, where she led landmark cases to end discrimination in education and housing in St. Louis, Missouri. We are here today to learn more about the potential impact on access to post-secondary education that race may have, among other potential barriers. We have closed captioning available for today's briefing. To access the captions, please click on the three dots located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, then click Multimedia Viewer. Now, I would like to invite Liliana Schiller, Support Specialist at the Commission, to assist with roll call. Committee members, if you are joining by phone, please press *6 to unmute yourself, and then press *6 to place yourself back in mute until I call on you during the question and answer session. Liliana, go ahead with roll call now, please.
Thank you, Vice Chair Buys. Jonathan Bean.
Present.
Joanna Bojovic-Borovis.
Present.
Mark Caligas. Mark Caligas, I see that you're on the line. I've just sent a request to unmute if you're available. Tabassum Halim.
Present.
Matthew Paprocki. Matthew, I also see that you're on the call. Oh, there you are.
Hello.
Hi, thanks for joining us. And Gregory Sanford.
Present.
All right, Vice Chair Buys, back to you.
Thank you very much. Also present is Ana Maria Fortes, who is our designated federal official. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights is an independent, bipartisan agency of the federal government charged with studying discrimination or denial of equal protection of the law because of race, color, religion, sex, age, disability, or national origin, or in the administration of justice. In each of the 50 states and the District of Columbia, an advisory committee to the Commission has been established, and they are made up of bipartisan persons who serve without compensation to advise the Commission on relevant information concerning their respective state. Today is the first in a series of 3 hearings examining access to post-secondary education. We are beginning with a broad look into this topic, and we hope that this meeting today will help inform us of various factors and subtopics to examine further in future meetings. In addition, we hope to examine the efficacy of current accounting and compliance structures, the role such measures play in ensuring equal protection of the laws, and work to identify gaps or continued areas of concern where additional accountability structures or protections may be warranted. Based on the information collected through testimony, the Commission will draft a report that will include findings and recommendations that will be shared with the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights. The Commission will then forward those recommendations to the appropriate federal and state entities. I would like to share at the outset that this meeting is being recorded for the public and the web hearing recording will be available on a public database. Please contact Anna Fortes at afortes@usccr.gov if you wish to obtain these records. Now today we will hear from 4 speakers. Presenters, we ask that you aim to stay within 12 to 15 minutes of your speaking time and reserve additional talking points for the question and answer session in case you are not able to address everything during your allotted time. Anna or Liliana will be sending you messages through the chat box to let you know when you are near the end of your speaking time. After the presentations, the committee will ask questions of the panelists, and then we will go into public comment. Please note that the Q&A session is reserved for community members, only members of to use the chat box located at the bottom right of your screen to let us know if you would like to make a comment or share your perspective about the topic. With that, I'd like to begin this morning's meeting. As I mentioned, we will hear from 4 persons. We will hear from Orphe Divounguy, who is Chief Economist with the Illinois Policy Institute. We will also hear from Juan Salgado, Chancellor at City Colleges of Chicago. We will be hearing from Daniel Mahony, President of Southern Illinois University, and Carmen Ayala, State Superintendent at the Illinois Board of Education. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Divounguy to begin.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me share some of the work that I've been doing on this issue. So as I'm from Africa and Gabon originally, a very small country where just my grandfather was living in the dirt in a village, and so this is an important issue to me. I have been very blessed through persistence, hard work, but a lot of help from a lot of people and a lot of luck to kind of find myself where I am today in this position. And so what I'm going to share with you today has to do with, the access to education in Illinois, but most importantly, how we can actually help some of the people who are kind of sidelined finish college, higher education, and essentially reap the rewards of college degrees. And so, closing the education gap starts with looking at what the problem really is, right? So when we look at the problem, we see that there are large disparities between minority students, particular Black students, in first going to college, right? College participation, but also finishing, graduating college. And the gap is even greater for people whose parents did not actually go to college. And one really interesting study that came out that was published recently by the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco actually highlights the economic cost of this gap. And if we compare if you look at the gap in both attainment, but also labor market outcomes, that gap cost the US economy roughly $22.9 trillion in lost economic output since 1990. So the cost is huge, and the cost is not just for those who are being left behind. The cost is huge for everybody, for every American. Another very important story to highlight is that we all kind of saw the impact of COVID-19 on communities of color. The COVID-19 pandemic likely increased the return to schooling. In other words, the gap between those with a degree and those without a degree. And so it seems obvious that helping low-income students and minorities obtain a post-secondary education should be the path forward. And of course, we also have to make those degrees work for them in the workplace. You know, during the pandemic, we saw that highly skilled workers could work from home, and we also saw their incomes increase a lot more, while low-income families were left behind. And so the gap really increased during the pandemic. So when I started looking at this topic, I wanted to see, you know, who's actually in post-secondary education. And in Illinois, it's mostly whites whose parents had a post-secondary experience. The data shows that only 16% of Black youth, and by Black youth, I mean those 18 to 22, whose parents did not attend an institution of higher learning, actually go to college, go past high school. And the graduation rate for that group is even lower than it is for other groups. So there are many barriers to participation. Some of them are going to be institutional barriers, right? So like entry requirements, course scheduling, for example. Others are going to be attitudes towards studying, which are going to be very different depending on your background and where you come from. And lastly, there are situational barriers, which are, you know, when we think about tuition fees, for example, the fact that you have to work 2 jobs and then go to class in order to finish your degree. So those are important roadblocks for obtaining a college education. And so my presentation is mostly about this last one, the fact that it's very expensive to go to college, and that for many students, especially low-income families, these students have to work multiple jobs, take huge student loans to try to get through and finish their degrees. And so we have a program in the state of Illinois, which is the MAP grant program. And those are grants that are given to low-income families. And in fact, the bulk of recipients are from low-income students. Some of them even below the poverty line, the official poverty line. And the majority of recipients are Black and Hispanics. And so expanding that program, in my opinion, would be an important step forward. And we know that because, you know, the bulk of the research actually shows that an additional $2,000 grant would raise college attainment rates of those recipients by 4 percentage points, right? And not only it would raise their college attainment, but also it raises their future earnings, right? So we end up with more productive individuals who earn more, right? Are better able to care for their families. And so I think there's a huge return when you think of a $2,000 additional investment that yields a $7,000 or 30% increase in the annual wage of recipients. That's a program worth investing in. And so, unfortunately, in Illinois, what we're seeing is, even though MAP grant spending as a whole has increased over time, it just hasn't increased as much as it should have, right? And if we did some of the math on this, if we actually prioritized this program and spent as much as a share of total expenditures, or even education spending, if we spent as much on MAP grants as we did in the year 2000, we would be spending a lot more and helping more students get out of college. And so this is a step forward that we're proposing at the Illinois Policy Institute to actually kind of focus taxpayer resources on programs that actually work and yield huge returns on investment. And it's critical because when you look at spending at the state level in Illinois, you realize that very little is done to kind of evaluate the return on investment. And when we compare spending across categories, we see, for example, that one of the main cost drivers for budgets, Illinois budgets, has been this public employee retirement system that has driven spending over that course of that same time period by over 500%, while other programs are kind of left behind. And one of the major solutions to fix that problem is the state of Illinois actually enacting a constitutional amendment, lawmakers putting a constitutional amendment on the Illinois ballot in order to help kind of free up resources in the state budget for programs that actually yield obvious positive returns for taxpayers. You know, again, it's crucial to understand that closing this attainment gap is not just to help those communities, but actually it would benefit the entire state and even the country. Thank you very much. That's my time.
Thank you so much for that important information. Next, I would like to invite Juan Salgado, who is the Chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, to provide some remarks to the committee.
Hello, and a good day to everybody. Thank you to the members of the committee for inviting me to address you today. As Chancellor of City Colleges of Chicago, I oversee 7 of Illinois' 48 community colleges. Illinois community colleges serve students seeking a better life for themselves and their families. I can personally attest to this, as community college set me and my 5 brothers and sisters, you know, on very good career paths. My dad was a factory worker, and you know, here we are, all with great career paths, all gone through community colleges in our state. The truth is, day in and day out, community colleges support students with greater challenges on fewer resources. If this committee wants to create a more equitable, just, inclusive society, community colleges are your partners in this effort. We only ask that we be treated equitably in return. Illinois community colleges, we're urban, we're suburban, we're rural. We have something in common, is we're catalysts for upward mobility. I want to share some information with you on that regard. According to the Illinois Community College Board, attending a certificate or degree at a community college results in higher earnings for students with an average annual rate of return of nearly 27%. 3 years after completing a long-term certificate in Associate's Applied Science program, African-American students increased earnings 88%, and Latinx students increased their earnings by 119%. City Colleges of Chicago itself is ranked in the top 10% of 2-year colleges nationally on mobility. That is, moving 27% of our students up 2 income quintiles. Community colleges, you see, are delivering results with a student population facing greater challenges than most. We're open access institutions, so we take all students, we accept all students with open arms. At city colleges, nearly 3/4 of our students we serve are Black or Latinx. All of our colleges are eligible to be called minority serving institutions. 2 colleges are eligible to be predominantly Black institutions. 4 colleges are eligible to be Hispanic serving institutions, and 1 is eligible as a PBI or HSI. Many of our students are the first in their family to go to college, as our previous speaker mentioned. There are also parents, and many are working while going to school. Our students, by the way, also experience and have experienced challenges before the pandemic, life challenges, I should say. More than 60% of our students who took the Real College Survey identified recently as having been either food or housing insecure. You could see the high levels of food and housing insecurity that our students actually face daily. 15% of those who responded identified as having been homeless, you know, very recently. And so these are, you know, real challenges that our students face as they persist and as they reach, you know, success with our institutions. At city colleges, roughly 3/4 of our students arrive at college not yet ready for college credit courses in math or English, or English, I should say. In fact, of the nearly 66,000 college students in Illinois needing developmental education, 52% or 79% of those students were served at Illinois community colleges. The pandemic, as you might imagine, has made our students' challenges worse, forcing many of our students to sit out college, to take care of themselves or loved ones, or to pick up a job to cover the lost income of another family member. The disproportionate impact, the heavy burden that our students faced before the pandemic has only gotten heavier. For city colleges, students who didn't return, finances were their top concern. Like so many Illinois community colleges, we're doing all we can to support our students in all the facets of their lives. To ensure students can access college, we have held the line on tuition for the last 6 years, no increases. We have used federal resources to eliminate $5.5 million in student account balances. We launched a Fresh Start Debt Forgiveness Program, which allows students to learn off their debt, waiving an additional $1.9 million in student debt. We launched a Future Ready program, offering more than 100 short-term credential programs from cybersecurity to child development and others at no cost. And we continue to provide the STAR Scholarship, which is a free tuition and book scholarship for up to 3 years, and many other scholarships that we have. But I want to be clear, the cost of tuition is just the beginning. Student need goes way beyond that. We see students as whole people and are building a culture of care to support them. We offer wellness centers for social emotional support. We're building the capacity of our team to deliver trauma-informed responses for students impacted by violence, including domestic violence. Our academic supports include tutors, advisors, career transfer, veteran, disability access centers. We loan out thousands of technology devices to students who need a laptop or Wi-Fi to study. We continue to build apprenticeships with employers to create opportunities for students to earn while they learn. And we are directing resources to remove barriers for students with the greatest challenges. Through the Chicago Roadmap, we are working with the Chicago Public Schools to close equity gaps. I'm going to give you a few examples. Individualized education plans, or IEPs as we know them, they do not transfer automatically when a student leaves high school and goes to college. Students who need us the most can fall through the cracks and fail to continue their specialized services at the college level if they do not self-advocate. So we're working with Chicago Public Schools to ensure that students with IEPs are properly supported in the transition to college. At age 22, students with disabilities age out of our public K-12 education system and need to go on a waiting list up to 7 years long for additional support services. So we're working with partners at CPS and Special Olympics Chicago, the Annixter Center, Alderman Matt O'Shea, to close that gap by providing an entry route to community college students with disabilities when they hit 22. We've developed a comprehensive plan to also better serve students in need of developmental education, as I mentioned earlier. Our plan stems from recommendations developed by our faculty, include co-requisite courses, summer bridge programs, and math and English programs at CPS high schools. We're also focused on improving the number of students who take and pass college-level English and math in their first year. In fact, last year we saw a 10% point increase in math and a 2 percentage point increase in English on this measure. We're ramping up work to address and prevent violence in our community. Still I Rise is a cannabis education program at Olive Harvey College that prepares students with a prior cannabis charge to enter the cannabis industry. And Weekend Warriors at Daly College is a partnership with community organization Iman that prepares students from at-risk communities to earn certificates in welding on the weekends. We're doing all we can to support our students, especially those in most need of support, to close the very real equity gap that exists. Let me be clear. We have an ambitious goal at City Colleges to close our equity gaps in 4-year student outcomes over the next decade, a gap between white and Black students of 25 percentage points and between white and Latinx students of 20 percentage points. These historical gaps have always existed. What's different today is we're making it transparent and we have a plan to address them. But it requires not just effort, it requires also resources. Like other Illinois community colleges, we are supporting a universe of nearly 70,000 students with significant needs on dollars dwarfed by our sister universities. In fall 2020, Illinois Community College collectively served 234,000 undergraduate students, all from Illinois, almost all from Illinois. And our public four-year university served 182,000 undergrad and grad students. Meanwhile, if you look at the Illinois FY21 allocation to public four-year universities, total more than $1.1 billion, while community colleges received $432 million. We serve roughly 29% more students with greater academic and economic needs on less than half the state allocated dollars. We don't want to take funds away from others, but I do want you to be aware of the level of need of the students we serve and recognize that the current distribution of dollars is not equitable. Take the issue of PBIs, predominantly Black serving institutions, a federal designation created by then Senator Barack Obama. PBIs have a higher bar for percentage of students enrolled than other MSIs, but receive a smaller share of available funds. Hispanic serving institutions only require 25% Hispanic student enrollment compared with 40% African American enrollment for PBIs. HBCUs have no initial enrollment requirements for funds, while PBIs require at least 1,000 students. Yet PBIs receive a much smaller portion of the CARES Act funds when compared to MSIs. This is an issue of equity that I hope you will include in your report. I know we're doing all we can with the resources we have to support our students, and we strive to do even more. We would love to be able to take cost off the table for our students and once and for all. And we want to make sure we have the resources in place to close the equity gap. As you think about how you can help us serve as partners in our common equity goals, please advocate for Illinois community colleges. We appreciate the federal focus on historically Black colleges and universities, and we ask you to advocate for similar funding for minority serving institutions, especially predominantly Black institutions. When you think about funding, recognize that we need funds to open the door to students, but also to provide the supports to ensure our students are successful. And finally, help us remove barriers after students complete. Incentivize employers and four-year universities to work with our students to further their goals. Our destiny as a city and state depends on more students like those we serve at community colleges, making their way through post-secondary education. The value of education is real, but so is the cost of inaction. There is a real cost in lost learnings, lost hope, and lost potential if we don't make a change. We want to work with you to create a more inclusive society. Please work with us to realize our students' dreams. Thank you for holding this hearing, and thank you for calling attention to what is really needed once and for all to close the equity gap. Thank you.
Thank
All right. Well,
you
thank
very
you, and I
much, Mr.
appreciate the
Salgado.
opportunity.
And next we will have
Thank you.
Mahony from Southern Illinois University. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate you taking the time to have this hearing, and it's a topic that's particularly important to me and to us at the SIU system. I should note we're the only university system in the United States to publicly commit itself to being an anti-racist university system, and so this is something we're focused on, frankly, every day, so I appreciate this. I'm going to run through some data real quickly on the equity gaps in Illinois. When you look at those in the adult population who have a bachelor's degree or higher, we see large gaps between white and Asian American adults and African American and Latinx adults. What we also see, though, is a gap with those who have some college but no degree. In fact, for African Americans, that's higher than the percentage that graduate from college. And this is critically important. We've talked to already a few speakers about return on investment. So for students who graduate from either of the SIU campuses, the return on investment over their lifetime is about a little over $1 million in increased earnings. For those who have some college but no degree, it's actually a negative economic impact on them. They're worse off than if they had never gone to college at all. And that comes from a study just recently released by Georgetown University. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. Those who come in and don't finish do not benefit at all from the experience. Enrollment declines, things are not getting better. So we've seen an overall enrollment decline during the last decade in Illinois. but that decline has been greater for African Americans. As has been mentioned with the COVID-19 pandemic, we don't expect that to get better. We expect that's probably going to get worse, at least in the initial period. So I'm going to walk through many of the issues and concerns really at each step in the academic journey. As was mentioned before, when we look at access and affordability, there are gaps, if you go to the next slide, gaps in college enrollment of high school graduates. Again, African-American students are behind white students, and there's a number of reasons for those gaps, but some of that certainly is related to funding and financial support that they may have. Now, I will say a couple things. With the FAFSA, it's really critically important, and I'm not sure this message always gets out there as well as it should, not only completing the FAFSA, but completing it as soon as possible and applying to colleges as soon as possible. While Pell Grants are not a first-come, first-serve grant opportunity, if you qualify, you get them, many things that are tied to the FAFSA are first-come, first-serve. MAP funding is one of those. A lot of the university scholarships are run out by the time students apply later in the spring. So while we accept those applications later, some of the funding is no longer available. So applying as early as possible can make a huge difference in the financial aid package that students get. We've been committed really to trying to support those students with the greatest needs. So for families with incomes under $63,575, between MAP, Pell Grants, and our internal funding, we cover all of their tuition, so they can go tuition free. So that's one thing we can do. But again, sometimes there's additional costs with going to college, and that doesn't cover every student. The next issue we run into, of course, is use of standardized tests for admissions and scholarships. And despite the fact we've known for a very long time that they're socioeconomically biased, they're culturally biased, we still rely heavily on them for admissions and scholarships in most universities. This creates a couple problems. Certainly that goes back to the access issue. And again, we've eliminated that for admissions, but it's just as important that we've eliminated it for scholarships. What I found over the years when I was at my previous institution in South Carolina, Winthrop University, I found that the students who came from the highest socioeconomic backgrounds got the most institutional aid through our merit scholarship program. And that was because we used the SAT scores and ACT scores to determine merit scholarships. If we took that out and only used high school GPA, those gaps tend to decrease. So we often focus with our needy students about providing them need-based aid, but often they really deserve merit-based aid, but they simply don't get it because of that over-reliance on test scores. I also think there's a lot of misinformation about costs and increased debt that hasn't necessarily been helpful to students in understanding what their best option is. I will often say the worst piece of information out there is the published tuition and fees. Everybody goes to that to determine what colleges cost. When I was at Winthrop University, 98% of our students got some type of aid. That meant 2% of the incoming freshmen actually paid the full tuition and fees that was published. It's a relatively meaningless piece of information because most of our students, even at SIU, about 78% are getting some aid. So we focus very much on that number, but it doesn't tell us much about what students are actually paying. And also it doesn't tell us some of the other fees that are associated with it. So again, many schools have different fees that go on top of that. So finding out what your student will actually pay going to college is incredibly difficult, both because of the extra fees, but also because of tuition discounting, which is fairly significant. Because of that misinformation, we often find that students under-apply. This is particularly true for first-generation college students, for students of color. In other words, they apply to institutions less than they're capable of going to, and often end up paying more than they would if they applied to those other institutions because there's not enough information about how much scholarship they would get if they went to those. And again, we see a lot of information about debt, which is certainly important to keep in mind when students are going to college. On average, for both of our institutions, student debt ends up being less than $25,000. I'd like to see it lower than that, but keep in mind, that's a $1.1 million return on investment for a $25,000 debt. That's actually not a bad deal, but that's not generally how it's reported in the general public. So again, we discourage students from applying places which actually may benefit them more economically over the long term. We also see African-American students disproportionately enrolled at for-profit colleges where they end up usually accumulating more debt and cost them more over their lives. The last thing I would also say too, when it comes to affordability, the incentive for institutions, being honest, is actually to go after those students with little need. Those with little need tend to be retained at higher rates and increased retention rates and increased graduation rates. So there's not a lot of incentive for universities to go after students with greater need. Next slide. We also see a lot of gaps within the transition and early college experiences. And what I'll focus on is access to dual enrollment and early credit opportunities. African Americans in Illinois are about 15% of the high school population, but only 9% of the dual credit enrollment. And that's similar for AP classes, and white students are overrepresented at both. Some of this is because not every school has the same access to dual credit and early college or early credit opportunities in AP classes. So some of it is based on the schools they go to. There are some where there is actually no opportunity for getting that early college credit. But then there's also, even when there is access, we find that students of color are less likely to be put into those classes. So that gets down to advising and counseling, and we could do better on that. On top of that, when they get to college, as Chancellor Salgado talked about, the needing developmental classes, that's much greater for African American and Latinx students than it is for white students. So the combination both of not having the early credit opportunities and then taking classes that provide them no credit puts them further behind by the time they get to their end of the first year, which I'll get to in a second. There's a lot of talk about summer bridge programs, and we have that at both of our institutions, and they're great. They increase success. They take away some of this gap in earning credits, but frankly, there's not enough spots for everybody who really would benefit from it. And when we have students enrolled in those programs, that means they're not working in the summer, and for many of those students and their families, that's hard to do. So it's not surprising when we look at retention rates, this is fall to fall retention rates, that African American students and Latinx students are well behind white students. And it gets much worse is when you look at those who advance to sophomore status. In other words, those who've earned 30 hours by the end of their first year, that's only true for 33% of African American students, 53% of Latinx students, and 70% of white students. When we look at the graduation rates, it's interesting, they pretty much mirror that freshman to sophomore retention rate numbers that we just talked about. Only 38% of African American students in Illinois are graduating for the four-year institutions in 6 years. Latinx is 52.5% and 70% for white students. Now, I've presented this data many times to many group of faculty, and I will tell you one of my biggest concerns is when I present that, there's a lot of, well, they're not adequately prepared. They're not capable of being here. All of these things, we need to change it to more of a growth mindset among our own faculty. Frankly, most university faculty were not trained necessarily to be teachers. They weren't trained on learning development. And we sometimes discount the ability of students to do well because of some of the data I just presented. I will say when I was at Winthrop University, we were one of a handful of institutions in the country that had no equity gaps in graduation. Our Black students and Latinx students graduated at higher rates. They were not better prepared. We did not have more resources, but we did have a group of faculty that believed in every student and believed every student was capable of graduating, and that made an enormous success. And they were willing to spend the time with students to help them when they needed that additional support. So I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about that. Next, I'll talk about student well-being and when they get to college. One of the things I learned early on in academia is sometimes we mistake rigor for rigidity or rigidity for rigor. We often put in rules that make it harder for students to graduate, harder to move through our systems, and they're rigid, but we do it because we think it's more rigorous. And I could give you many examples of that. I just heard a story recently about a student at another institution. It was an African-American female student, a single mom who had to work. She had a 99 average in her class, and the professor wanted to fail her because she missed too many classes. She had a 99 average in the class, and they were going to fail her because she may have missed too many classes. That's not rigor, that's rigid. And we do this far too often in higher education. And that, again, for students who need that additional support, that keeps them from finishing. And really, we need more holistic supports. What we found at SIUE with some of our recent research is if our students have limited need, in other words, we're able to meet their need. I shouldn't say they don't have need, but we're able to meet their need and they don't owe a lot of money for college. And they participate in some of our programs, which we call SOAR and Fame and Game. We actually wipe out the retention rate gaps. They actually are retained at the same rates as the overall university average. Again, not about academic support. It was really much more about social support. We're trying to increase the number of students in those programs and expand them beyond the first year. Too often, a lot of our programs are based on first year, not throughout the system. I will say when I was a dean at Kent State, we had an office for diversity outreach and development that did provide that support through the entire college experience. Once again, No retention rate gaps. In fact, our our African-American students were retained at a higher rate and graduated at a higher rate than the university averages were. So we were able to basically address equity gaps largely through these types of social support programs, as well as some additional financial support for the students. And I'll finish up with talking about connections to career. So even after students graduate, we still see gaps related to race. So when some of the research on good jobs after college finds that that's less likely for African-American students than it is for white students, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out it's even worse for African-American women. The gap is significantly larger. And then there's this 13% gap in compensation 2 to 3 years after graduation. Now, certainly some of this is related to biases that exist in larger society, but one of the reasons is program choice. We tend to perpetuate demographics and professions. So high paid professions tend to have less students of color in them than other professions do. And so it's engineering and others. This has an impact on future earnings and the accumulation of wealth. Once again, this is something we can address. When I was at Winthrop University as president, we had a partnership with PricewaterhouseCoopers who wanted to increase diversity within the accounting profession. By the time I left, and Winthrop was a small school, we had 20 African-American freshmen in our accounting program. Most large institutions wouldn't come anywhere near that amount. What did we have? Well, with PricewaterhouseCoopers support, we had additional financial support for those students. We had a lot of similar activity, social support, as we talked about with Fame and Game. We also provided more mentoring. They had internship opportunities with PricewaterhouseCoopers earlier in their careers. I keep in touch with a lot of those students, and many of them are now working for the large accounting firms and have had very successful careers. I should point out that one of the things we had to do with this program isn't just about what happens at our level, but what happens in the K-12 system, of going out and actually trying to identify students who would do well in these programs before they even got to us. So when we talk about career resources and career preparation, that needs to go down to the high school and middle school. So they're open up to the possibilities of careers before they get here, because if they decide later, once they come to us, it's likely to delay graduation and again, increase costs. So I'll finish with that. And again, thank you for the opportunity to speak with all of you today.
Thanks for information. Our last panelist today is Carmen Ayala.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
State Superintendent at the Illinois State Board of Education. Yes, can hear you.
Thank you. I lead the Illinois State Board of Education, which oversees and supports our state's 852 school districts. And I really do appreciate. Can you hear me? I think there may be some okay. So I appreciate the opportunity to share with you some of our efforts to provide all of our high school students with the best opportunities for a successful transition to post-secondary education. And in my presentation today, I'll focus on what we're doing in 3 of your areas of focus: academic preparation, remediation, and affordability. Next slide, please. First of all, in 2015, Illinois lawmakers adopted the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, which includes 4 strategies that help students prepare for post-secondary and career opportunities. The 3 that I'll focus on today are the Post-Secondary and Career Expectations Framework, we know it as PACE, the transitional math and English instruction during the senior year of high school to help students avoid remedial college courses, and a new system for school districts to award college and career pathway endorsements on high school diplomas. Next slide, please. So I'll start with the college and career pathways endorsement, which work like declaring a major in college. Students earn a seal on their diploma that certifies that they've specialized in one of 7 fields. The pathway ensures that students have taken the courses and engaged in the experiences to be academically prepared to succeed in that field after high school. 47 high school graduates in 5 districts awarded endorsements last year. And let me give you an example of how Pathways programs work. Ridgewood High School, located in the Chicago suburbs, was the first in Illinois to award the College and Career Pathway endorsement. The pathways at Ridgewood begin with a career exploration experience in 9th grade. By the end of the year, each student declares an interest in either arts and sciences or business and technology, which helps determine which electives they participate during their sophomore year. Students at Ridgewood also participate in Project Lead the Way engineering curriculum and earn dual credit with Triton College. 9 students in Ridgewood's class of 2020 successfully completed the education and manufacturing and engineering pathways and received the endorsement on their diploma or transcript. All 5 manufacturing graduates received job offers in manufacturing. 3 took the jobs and 2 enrolled in college to major in engineering at Harvard and the University of Chicago. Of the 4 who earned the education pathway endorsement, 3 are now pursuing education majors at 4-year colleges. Next slide, please. Now, before we move on, I want to be mindful that the term post-secondary doesn't have to mean a 4-year university. Some students may prefer trade and technical schools and/or certifications offered by community colleges. Illinois was one of the first 6 states to receive federal approval for our Perkins CTE plan, which strengthens connections between CTE and post-secondary opportunities and the workforce through activities like technical skills, competitions, dual credit, and internships. We call this career-connected learning. During the 1920 school year, high school seniors enrolled in cooperative education courses that were previously known as work-based learning, graduated on time at a significantly higher rate than students overall, which makes sense because work-based learning is the clearest example of connecting the classroom to the real world and to what students want to do after high school. Our Perkins CTE plan contains specific goals and requirements for increasing access to CTE among underrepresented students. Next slide, please. The second component of the Act is transitional math and English courses. As you know, remedial coursework is a barrier to students persisting in college and graduating on time because it costs time and money, but does not earn students the credit toward their degree. It's an indicator we watch closely on our Illinois report card, and in very good news, it has started to drop. Our Transitional Math and English initiative entails community colleges and high schools working in partnership to create courses. The syllabi for the courses are approved by both the local advisory panel and a statewide portability panel. Successful completion of these courses result in direct placement into credit-bearing courses at all community colleges and accepting Illinois universities without a placement test. Illinois provided all high school districts with a phased implementation plan with the goal that all students who need it have the opportunity to enroll in transitional math by the end of this school year. Out of 470 total high school districts in Illinois, 227, or about 50%, have either approved courses or have submitted courses to their state's portability panel for review. Transitional English is currently in the pilot program phase with 18 high school districts and their partnering community colleges. Next slide, please. The third component is the PACE framework, which was developed with extensive input from stakeholders and experts. It is designed to guide students, families, and educators on the specific experiences and knowledge every student needs to make the most informed decision about their college and career goals. Perhaps the most amazing attribute of this framework is that all this guidance fits on a single page. It's a short checklist of items that every student needs to accomplish each year from 8th grade through high school graduation. For example, Every 8th grader should take 1 unit of financial literacy. Every 9th grader should understand how coursework, attendance, grades, and extracurricular activities affect post-secondary options. Every 10th grader should visit at least one workplace that matches their career goals. And every 11th grader should visit 3 post-secondary institutions and take a college entrance exam. Next slide. I have 2 other Illinois programs to mention before I turn over the mic. Illinois is currently in a 4-year pilot program in which qualified students, which means all those graduating in the top 10% of their high school class, completing necessary course requirements and scoring high enough on their SAT or ACT, receive letters of automatic admission from 4 of our public state universities. They don't have to apply or write an essay or meet a deadline. They just receive the letters automatically. We look forward to seeing the results on that pilot program for access to post-secondary opportunities and enrollment in Illinois colleges and universities. Another new law sponsored by the Illinois Black Caucus was enacted last spring, and it enhances equity by ensuring that all students have a chance to take the courses needed for college enrollment, including foreign language courses and computer science. Our State Board of Higher Education is now obligated to identify the courses required and recommended for admission at each public university. The law also requires all high schools to offer at least one computer science course to all students, beginning with the 23-24 school year. The Illinois State Board of Education adopted rigorous computer science standards this past fall, and beginning with the 28-29 school year, 2 years of foreign language becomes a high school graduation requirement to better align with college admission standards. So in closing, I want to affirm your efforts to address gaps in post-secondary access. We join you in working toward a future in which all students are prepared to graduate and successfully pursue their dreams after high school. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks to all of the panelists. Before we move to an answer, remind members of the public that if you're interested in offering public comment following the Q&A session, please raise your hand by hovering your mouse over your name or type in the chat to let our staff know. We will add you to the list and announce your name. Now, we will move into the question and answer portion of the meeting. We'll have a limited amount of time, so please be succinct responses. Please indicate if you have a question for a specific speaker or if your question is for all of the speakers. If members have additional questions, I'd like to ask you to use the raise hand function. And for members joining through the phone only, you can press *3 to raise your hand. You can also unmute yourself by pressing *6. I now plan to call on each committee member in alphabetical order to see if you have a question for the panel. So I'll begin with John.
Thank you, Cindy. My question is for any of the panelists. It's about the role of creating online degrees for working students to lower their costs because they avoid some of the campus fees and to meet their schedule. To what degree is online education beyond simply courses, but entire degrees part of the solution?
I would just share at city colleges, pre-pandemic, the level of online education was, quite limited. About 10% of our students utilized online education prior to the pandemic, and that has increased substantially. With the what we now call online live, remote using Zoom technology, which our faculty have gotten very adept at. We see much more utilization of students in both the online, the traditional online, asynchronous, along with this new mode of instruction that is here to stay at City Colleges of Chicago, which is now what we call online live. And then we have traditional face-to-face. Right now, roughly 50% of our students are choosing that mode of instruction. What we also see is students choosing to take some instruction in person and some instruction utilizing the online live. The reason stated for that is, quite frankly, schedule. The things that you talked about earlier, which is we work with very much an adult population, often a working population, a parental population. All of these things require time and effort. And so reducing commute times for our students, we don't have, housing. We're not a residential program, but reducing commute times is very important. And allowing someone who's a mother, a father, to, study from home while they care for their children, eliminates some of the childcare burden that our students have faced in addition to transportation burden. So we think it's going to be something that we are definitely leaning into, but we also recognize that there are some students that perform better in in-person instruction and require the social, emotional supports that come with in-person instruction. And so we're going to leave it to the students to decide, providing course scheduling that gives them the choice to make.
I'll add to what Chancellor Salgado said. I would agree with everything he said on it, and I think we've expanded our possibilities when it comes to online instruction just over the last couple of years. In fact, personally, I've taught 3 online classes since the pandemic started. I never taught online before, so I'm like everybody else learning this. I think a couple of things I would say. One is that I think in higher education, we should try to find ways that best meet the needs of our students, and that's going to vary. I have a family member, their child has dropped out of college because of the online instruction. Just did not do well with it. As Chancellor Salgado was talking, it doesn't work well with every individual student. So I don't think it's going to replace the face-to-face completely. I also will say it makes it more difficult to do some of those support programs I talked about, FAME and GAME and SOAR. It's just a little harder to do those online. So that's somewhat challenging. That being said, it works really well for some students, and it does reduce costs and there's benefits. I think right now what we're really focused on particularly is that group I talked about at the beginning, those with some college but didn't finish a degree, who are now working professionals who need that college degree. Having the online options will make an enormous difference. Again, they're the ones it would be difficult for them to come to campus and get a degree from us. We're actually working across the SIU system so they can take classes on either of our campuses, and that will allow them to finish more efficiently and more quickly and get to that degree as fast as possible. So we're going to be announcing sometime probably the next year an SIU online program that will allow them to do that, kind of taking classes from different campuses. We're working on the details of that right now.
So
Can I just say one other thing? Oops.
In the K-12 space, the Illinois State Board of Education has an online virtual course catalog that we provide to our districts, and it's used in many different ways. For some of our students who have to go to work to help support their families, or who are having families of their own at an early age, these courses can provide them with opportunities to complete their high school as well as gain credit. Some of these courses are used also for dual credit situations. In Illinois, it's also an access issue. We're a very diverse state. We have rural, urban, suburban, and in many of our areas across the state, we may not have a particular teacher. And so to provide these courses to our students through the virtual course catalog is a benefit. And so those are some of the ways we utilize online courses in the K-12 space.
I would like to expand on that because I think Superintendent Ayala made a very good point here. We have schools that are very small schools in Chicago that don't have the requisite instructor for dual credit dual enrollment, but they do have the students. And so, we are now able to provide more equitable access because of this capability that we have.
Thank you all for your responses. I will next go to another commissioner, Joanna
Yes, my question is to
Budswine Warwick. Sorry, Joanna, for mangling it.
That's all right, no problem. My question is to Chancellor Salgado. Is the City of Colleges of Chicago thinking of expanding even more into the communities, especially on South and West Side? And what I mean by that, having so-called off-campus sites where, students can get education there as well as support services and just even incentive to be in college.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I can tell you a number of things that we're doing that are creative and in that direction as an institution. We've set up, 3 locations already where we are providing early childhood education at community daycare centers, one on the south side, one on the west side, one on the northwest side, partnering up with local community institutions so that the parents in that community never have to leave that location, in order to get the education that they need in early childhood education, right? And so we're actually expanding on that model, creating something called a cafe model. We understand that a singular course will only meet a certain level of student needs in that community, but by creating a cafe, if you will, a place where students can sign in virtually to our coursework, we can actually reach, again, in early child education, a really important area of need where we know that there are many people in community that would like to sign up, but we have to remove barriers. These cafes will be supported, but also, will, have the requisite wraparound supports and technology and tutoring available so that the students can access these career opportunities. We're going to be doing something similar in other high growth areas like transportation, distribution, and logistics. We have a wonderful facility on the south side of Chicago at Olive Harvard College. We put a $45 million investment, and we want to make sure that students from any part of the city can access those opportunities. And so we're going to be setting up learning hubs in different communities where you can do the first semester or the first year of your education in transportation, distribution, and logistics by coming to the learning hub and getting the right supports, not just from us, but from our community partners. So we are very much working in community. Sometimes working in community, it's not about us setting up a learning hub, but it's about community institutions bringing students to us that they have identified, right? So I mentioned the Weekend Warrior program, where what Iman does is take really, men who are at risk of shooting or being shot, quite frankly, and so pulls them out of that environment, brings them on the weekends to Daily College, and the college is theirs, not just for welding, but what we also are doing is the gymnasiums there for physical fitness, and the classrooms there for art therapy and wellness services. And so it's a holistic approach. And so when we think about how we work with community, we're thinking about how we provide that holistic support and how we get that absolute access that isn't just access because of tuition affordability. It's access because we've thought about all of the barriers that student may have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Those sound like great programs.
Wonderful, really. Congratulate, honestly, great programs. Yes, I agree.
Next, I'm going to ask Mark Clywood. So is Mark with us?
Yes, I am. I think I'm having a little bit of lag with the audio, so apologies for that. But yeah, thank you everyone for taking the time to speak with us. So my question is, to my understanding, undocumented students do not qualify for federal educational assistance, and these young people are not just located in urban communities in Illinois, but also in the suburbs and rural areas as well. So I invite anybody on the panel to address what your institutions are doing to address this gap, or if you have any particular policy proposals to address this.
I'll just share City Colleges of Chicago, which obviously is, a limited geography within the whole state. I would want to make clear just, the things we've been able to do. I don't think what we're doing serves all undocumented students, but I think we're trying to stretch ourselves as far as we can. Star Scholarship, which is available for any student in the city of Chicago that graduates from a Chicago public school with the B average, is open regardless of your documentation status. And so we've had many undocumented students really avail themselves and take advantage of Star Scholarship. It becomes really the main option that they have, because they'll get the first 2 years of their college experience completely free. We have also, as part of Star Scholarship, arranged with a number of universities discounted tuition. That's part of what we call Star Plus, and in many cases, full tuition scholarships. And so those undocumented students also can then take advantage of those scholarships. We're also working with other institutions like the Dream US to help with the additional journey to the four-year university for undocumented students. I mentioned something earlier about Future Ready, which are these 100 programs that are sort of the entry to post-secondary education. Many of them are credit programs, some of them are continuing education programs, but what they all have in common is that they're open to any Chicagoan, including undocumented Chicagoans. So where we can, we're doing that. The last thing I say is I know the state is also a leader in this, regard with, the important advocacy work that has been done. There's a greater level of inclusion with regard to MAP grants than there ever has been, and and that's just happened recently, and that certainly is a help to undocumented students as well.
So Juan mentioned the MAP grant. One of the things that Illinois has also done is created the Illinois Alternative Application for Financial Aid. And so this not only allows undocumented students and other students, such as transgender students, who can't complete the FAFSA to access state aid like the MAP grants. And so completing either the FAFSA or the Illinois Alternative is now a graduation requirement for high school.
And I think most of it's been covered fairly well. I will say, again, coming from South Carolina, where we're not allowed to offer any aid to undocumented students, scholarships, nothing. So we had almost no undocumented students at our institutions because of state law. We have a lot more, as the speakers have talked about, opportunity to support them. And again, with our own scholarships, we certainly do that as well. And they're eligible for a lot of those programs as well. I will say when we had the CARES Act money and all of that, which was also restricted, we then raised money on our own with our donors to support our undocumented students who could not get access to that funding. So we're very aware of that all the time and trying to close that gap in funding for those students whenever we possibly can.
Thank you, everyone. I will next ask Tabassum Halim if she would like to ask a question of our panelists.
Yes, I do. Well, how much
Tabassum, if you can speak louder, it's difficult to hear you.
Sure. I want to start off by showing being here,
It-
providing such.
You're still coming through very faint. If you can type in the chat your question and who you're directing it to, that would be helpful. I'm not sure if the issue will continue.
Better. All right, I will.
And I'll read off the question once it comes in through the chat. Bassam, it hasn't come through just yet. I'm not sure if there's a delay.
All right, why don't we move to Matt Paprocki and see if he has a question, and we'll come back to Tabassum Halim.
I do
Matt,
not have
if
a
you're with
question.
us,
Thank you.
go ahead.
I do want to say thank you for all the panelists. That was really wonderful and well-prepared testimony and very helpful. So I want to say thank you. I do not have any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you, Matt. Is Gregory Sanford with us? Would you like to ask a question?
Yes. I have one question. This is the thing I feel like people are told not to say. I have one quick question. For Mr. Salgado, you brought up the question of MSIs and PBIs, and you had a slide about that related to specific funds and some concerns you had related to the allocation of those funds to PBIs. And the question I have is, could you talk a little bit more about what specifically you were suggesting with respect to MSIs? Is this a question of there's more funding needed, that the allocation of funding needs to be changed? Could you just explain a little bit more about that? Because I was just a little confused. Maybe I misunderstood.
Yeah. Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity to, clarify. What I was calling attention to is the critical importance of PBIs in particular, right? And the high threshold that exists in order for you to be considered a PBI, right? So there's a critical importance given that all of the data that we see, right, almost from I won't say every institution, from many, many, many institutions will show you the same general trend. Black students behind their peers. Latinx students, white students as well, right? To varying degrees, but the general trend. And so PBIs are important because of that in particular, and they have a higher threshold. So all I was saying is it goes to reason that they in particular should receive, I would just say the same investment, right? The right investment. I hope that anything I said did not bring into question my belief that the investments that are being made in higher education are the right, they're good investments. We need to do more. We heard that from the Illinois Policy Institute, right? There's a payoff here. I believe there's a particular payoff with the investment in PBIs, and we're just not seeing that.
Thank you very
Did that help
much.
a little bit?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. Maybe we will turn back to Tabassum and see if she has been able to type her question in the chat.
Yes, this is Anna speaking. I'll read off the question that committee member Halim had posed, and it's directed to Chancellor Salgado. The question is, how are the inequities in PBI and MSI being addressed?
Look, that's a hard one for me to answer. You know, we're certainly and by the way, it's good to see you. It's been quite some time, and I hope you and your family are well. The it's hard for me to answer. We are trying to call attention to this issue for the reasons I stated earlier. I do want to give credit to, in the state of Illinois, President Z. Scott from Chicago State University, who first brought this analysis to me at City Colleges of Chicago in Illinois. We don't happen to have an HBCU. You know, Chicago State University is not an HBCU, but they are a PBI. And so when you look at the funding that has gone, rightly so, to HBCUs in the recent past, and including the CARES Act, institutions like Chicago State, or in my system, Kennedy King College and Olive Harvey College, who have been decimated, you know, I would just say, by the circumstances in their communities, along with colleges like South Suburban colleges. We just didn't get the same benefit, and yet our students are, you know, dealing with very much, you know, deep concerns, as I expressed earlier. And so, what we're trying to do is just get the word out, let people know this. I don't think it's very well known, and I think it's important to state that, you know, again, you know, these designations are, you know, quite recent, right? HBCUs have been around for a long time. This was created by, you know, then Senator Obama, and so, you know, just calling people's attention to these important designations, what they mean, and the need for, you know, equitable resources so we can all do a better job.
Thank you. That might be a good topic for follow-up at a later time. All right, are there any other members of the advisory committee who have questions that they would like to ask right now? All right, hearing none, I think we can go to our public comment. Would that be appropriate, Anna?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, so this will be an opportunity for the public to offer comments to the committee about this topic. Once again, I'm going to ask you to keep your comments limited to 2 to 4 minutes. If you would like to make a comment, please either raise your hand by hovering your mouse over the smiley face and then clicking on the raise hand, or you can type your comment into the chat. If you are joining by phone, you can press *3 to raise your hand. And you can also submit written comments by email to Anna Fortes at afortes@usccr.gov. So at this moment, maybe we can check to see if there's public comment. We'll give it just a moment for folks to figure out how to enter their comments. And while we're doing that, maybe I will go ahead and ask a comment or ask a question of our panelists. And this is really directed to all of you. And that is, if you had one topic, one issue, one thing that you would like this advisory committee to pursue in terms of increasing access and equity and access to higher education, what would that be? What's your number one priority?
I would say equitable and adequate resources to serve those students in greatest need.
Thank you. Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on that?
I would concur with Chancellor Salgado's number one priority. The data is very clear. We do have some gaps, and so to close those gaps in access, in affordability for all of our students entering the post-secondary journey of their lives.
Thank you very much.
I would like to add that that it is absolutely crucial that more resources find their way to help close those gaps. And but you know, the most important thing in Illinois is really to free up those resources by addressing the state's public employee retirement crisis. I think that if we're successful at doing that, then the opportunities will be there.
I think
Thank you.
I would focus primarily on the financial support for students, whether it's MAP funding, increasing Pell Grants, anything we can do. Again, the two biggest things we are finding on our research is that keep students from graduating. One is the financial need that they may have that's not being met. And the other thing I think is finding ways to support and learn from each other, frankly, on those student support programs that also are the other key point. I mean, those two things are the biggest things we're seeing as far as students graduating and being successful.
Thank you. It's always money, I guess, huh? More resources would be wonderful. Well, we do very much appreciate that. So I'm checking with Anna and Liliana, and it appears that we have no public comments at the moment. I do appreciate the members of the public who joined us today for this really important hearing. I want to mention that we have 2 more web hearings scheduled on this topic, and we certainly welcome all of you to join us for those web hearings. The next one will be on Tuesday, March 22nd, 2022, and the third one will be on April 18th, 2022. Both will be at the same time, beginning at 11 a.m. and going until 1 p.m. In the chat, you can see that the staff has included information on how to register for those hearings. So I will again say thank you so much to our panelists. We really appreciate the time that you took to prepare your testimony and share your expertise with our advisory committee today. We look forward to seeing many of you back at our future hearings, and we wish everyone a great rest of the day. So thank you again.